In this day and age of video games, most dopaminergic gamers out there prefer a nice shooter or survival experience. But I, on the other hand, prefer simulators where you play as a 30-year-old white Liberian twink that is capable of ripping out an Elden Lord's heart and is so autistic that he could single-handedly stop a child abducting private military using only a sword. Metal Gear Rising is the only thing that really gives me a boner anymore, and I actively go out of my way at least once a year to play it. After watching the Metal Gear Solid 3 trailer and hearing that sweet theme, I decided it was time to satisfy my yearly quota, but by removing Raiden's trademark weapon. Can you beat Metal Gear Rising Revengeance without a sword? Now, before I get verbally spanked by the select few testosterone goblins that play this game and this game only in the comment section below, the answer to the title of this video is technically no. The only way to do so is by getting a little wacky and installing a mod that completely removes Raiden's sword and instead gives him the same fisticuff moveset you are given when Armstrong disarms you in the finale. With this mod, we quite literally deny our blade its purpose and instead rely on the ancient empirical art known as fisting, which by the way pretty much does no damage. On top of this mod, I decided to also add 2 rules that'll make this run a little more immersive. Rule 1. I'll be taking no damage upgrades as it doesn't make very much sense to the overall theme of the run. Just like I know some of you disgusting freaks raw dog a public toilet without a toilet condom when taking a shit, I'll be completely raw dogging this game with the fisticuff moveset and its base damage from beginning to end on hard difficulty. And lastly, Rule 2. Although this is a no sword run, I won't be using any firearms or grenades. Is beating Sam even possible with these handicaps? Will the final fight of this game make me want to castrate myself with a pair of dull scissors? Well, sit back, grab a bag of bugles, place them on each of your fingers, and make sure to passionately caress that like button below, as it's time to watch your least favorite challenge runner suck septic water through a sour punch straw, all in the name of quality YouTube content. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is a musical disguised as a video game, where you can literally cut a man into 960 pieces while listening to a prostate-pumping soundtrack. There may be a lot to unpack from that statement, and if you're questioning whether Revengeance is an actual word, I'm going to just come out and tell you it absolutely is. It's a word because the Japanese love to put re in front of absolutely fucking everything for some reason. Don't question it. We play as a protagonist Raiden, aka Jack the Hemorrhoid, a bodyguard that was exceptionally skilled at being an absolute pain in the ass to any that opposed him. He was on a job like any other, but things immediately went south when his convoy was attacked by a man that literally radiated raw anime antagonist energy. This incredibly thick being was here to cause a sword-like deformation into our client's fucking cranium. In order to protect the Prime Minister of Africa, it was time to take matters into his own fists. These goons and their asses were begging for a beating, and fortunately for them, Raiden was charitable. I'm talking delivering a bunch of knuckle sandwiches to those that were hungry. Charitable. Before we start fisting some more dudes and our first boss, here's a little word from sellout Senza and this video's sponsor. I'd like to introduce you all to one of 6 companies in the 5 years this channel has been running that is willing to sponsor my verbose, glorified Let's Play shitposts. Factor. Factor provides stress-free, ready-to-eat, never-frozen meals that are not only chef-crafted, but dietitian-approved. These meals come delivered straight to your doorstep, Borderlands Ellie body pillow not included, and come in many different popular options, like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. Before we were sponsored on this channel, I actually purchased Factor a total of 3 times. Having a meal ready within 2 minutes was killer. Not only could I spend more time getting back to enjoying the finer things in life, but I also stopped shelling out even more doubloons to the turbo fast food corporations, as Factor is not only cheaper, but also hits the taste buds way better than any fast food meal would. Another thing that makes me go hog wild over Factor is that you can utilize their meals to work towards any wellness goals that you may have. Are you having trouble losing weight even after uninstalling Marvel Rivals and League of Legends? There is a calorie-friendly option. Are you looking to hit your protein macros after the gym but don't feel like cooking? There is a Protein Plus option, which I personally endorse and love the most. Head over to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50Senza to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50Senza at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. I want to give a big shout out to Factor for sponsoring this channel, and let's get back to our regularly scheduled copious amounts of mental damage. Going from my usual high-octane playthroughs of this game to this felt like night and day. Any traces of the chub that I worked up earlier, excited to play through this game again, were now gone, beating my overall chub to flaccid speedrun personal record. One of my first worries was that parrying or blocking wouldn't be possible for this challenge run, because the animation would still have a sword present during those actions. I'd like to report that I can do both of those things without ruining the challenge, which is a blessing from the Lord Almighty himself. What this game calls Blade Mode, I call an alternative for Viagra, and that too could still be used in this challenge run, as Raiden can apparently use his nails for our family-friendly and well-renowned Fruit Ninja gameplay. Those nails were a convenient design decision. At first, I questioned them, but now I'm not complaining. Our target was located, but it was clear that saving him was going to be tougher than we originally planned, thanks to a kaiju-sized robot and this girth gremlin that had no problem reducing the number of limbs and organs a human being had. With the Prime Minister kidnapped by these mysterious enemies, Raiden was his only hope, and after confronting the gremlin, it was clear that violence was our only option. Every self-respecting villain in this universe has a Metal Gear, and Baldi here was no different. It didn't take long to realize that I pretty much did diddly dick for damage. Peak performance required that I hugged its legs, and like a pest, I fisted away at the Metal Gear until I was able to dwindle it down. What made matters worse is after 15 minutes of fisting, I was finally 1% away from killing the beast, and then died because I am an absolute stupid idiot. Nobody should be dying to this thing, even with a handicap. But hey, this may sound like lethal levels of cope, but out of all of my deaths this run, this one's excusable, because dying to a Metal Gear is arguably the greatest cause of death in the Metal Gear universe. After another 10-minute diabolical session of meat tenderizing, I finally defeated the tutorial boss. This fight truly wasn't very hard, just tedious. We continued on, and it's quite a feat that Jack can even move or let alone run considering the size of his huge fucking testicles, because the Metal Gear showed up once again, and Raiden had no problem handing out another session of spankings. This time around was an absolute breeze, since I was finally getting used to how this mod worked, although it still took around 8 minutes to delete his operating system once again. After destroying a couple of $1 million micro missiles that could level a small country via his lethal kung fu dabbing technique, Raiden tapped into his Sharingan and proceeded to rip and tear like he was on some Doom shit. With this obstacle toppled, we located Cyborg Jeff Bezos, as Maxor called him, but it was too late. Prime Minister Ambatukum was killed in cold blood, same-day delivery, just as Amazon promised.
Dicks out for my boy the Prime Minister. Feels bad, man.
Game devs seem to have a thing for creating bitchy brunettes in video games. My favorite one of them all is Sam, who was of the fictional nationality Brazilian, and damn did he make me wish that Brazilians were real. He was our next boss fight, and by boss fight, I mean player humiliation ritual, because without breaking a sweat, he had no problem dragging his full rock-hard meat all over your face. Just as Raiden was about to take a trip to the Forever Box, rescue arrived, and as luck would have it, we were able to wiggle our way out of this lethal purple nurple. For Raiden and his crew, this was a gargantuan L. Not nearly as bad as the L young Senza took back 10 years ago when he bought Crackdown on the Xbox 360 to play the Halo 3 beta, only for it to end one day after, but damn near close. Having endured such a colossal cheek clapping, Raiden needed a few body augments and upgrades. Much like our real world, Raiden now followed a simple thesis: violence and being dummy thick solves absolutely everything. And he made that very clear after being dispatched on a lead to locate the same group that killed the Prime Minister. Giving the soldiers on this beach a good prostate knuckling wasn't a very difficult task, and this was where we learned of the healing mechanic that will pretty much carry us through a majority of this game. Doctor let us know that in order to power this PSA 10 pristine body, our energy needs were 278% higher than everyone else's. But fortunately for us, these soldiers were specifically chosen with the sole purpose of satiating our needs. Performing a finisher on them allowed us to extract the gamer subs using code Senza from their bodies, which in turn healed Raiden for a set amount. Was this ethical? No, but neither was their existence, because they were the offspring of cousins and siblings. That isn't canon, I just felt like adding that in, but it changes nothing. Up ahead is where we were taught about stealth and stealth kills. Performing stealth assassinations is definitely one of the optimal and easier ways to take down my enemies during a challenge run like this, as it can help us avoid any hazards that would threaten our robotic livelihood. Just for the goofs, I decided to perform a single assassination to see if Raiden would have a sword during the animation. Surprisingly, he didn't, and instead used his foot to penetrate this poor soul's asshole through his throat and rupture the vertebrae in his spine. This was surely massive news for any of you stealth enjoyers out there, but to stick to the tradition of this channel, we will be avoiding any stealth altogether. Rocket-propelled grenades weren't enough to stop me and my meat tenderizers, but I'll tell you boys and the 4% of girls at home now, my morale quickly nosedived after it took me a solid 5 minutes to kill 3 grunt enemies on technically the first level of the game. I can already tell that this will be the torture porn of video game challenges.
These normal enemies literally have the super soldier serum. Why won't you die? Alright, thanks bro.
In tribute to Hideo Kojima, the father of the Metal Gear series, Platinum Games made an enemy for him using the unused foot assets he took over the years. At first, I decided to try and take out the grunts that surrounded it, but after that didn't work, I fired up all the neurons in my noggin and remembered that blocking its charge attack would give you the opportunity to one-shot it, putting an end to its reign of unending terror for both my controller and I. With this knowledge, taking these things down was nothing but trivial. On a side note, I have an odd phobia towards these types of enemies, same with the finger creepers in Carrier Manor, and I think it all stems back to being morbidly terrified of the big toe monster from Courage the Cowardly Dog when I was younger. Now that the last of the enemies were dispatched, it was time to set our peepers on a new challenge, a tussle with the mechanized furry that was experiencing an existential crisis. My first few tries weren't looking that great, and I received a nice lavish amount of spankings, attempting to get even a couple of hits in. Rather quickly, I was able to adapt. I did suffer an unfortunate death due to the game robbing me out of a heal, causing me to lose my shit, but we won't talk about that, because in my post-crash out clarity, I was able to use that death to fuel my elite class gaming techniques, and locked in making sure that this goober and his henchmen got a biblical smackdown put on them by my fists. Upon Blade Wolf's defeat, this nefarious group sent in Apache helicopters to send me to God. I'm not going to lie to you gentlemen, this section did have me coming and shitting in my trousers a bit, wondering if taking them down was even possible with our handicap. But my worries quickly dissipated, and thanks to a bit of parkour, I was able to do the most manly shit in existence, and take down a military-grade helicopter using only my fists. This wasn't the only time this level we would have to get a little creative taking down a flying enemy, and following some super bland gameplay, I'm talking pretty much the Raisin Bran of video game gameplay, I was able to trial and error my way through and located the target we were beating this tremendous amount of ass for. Our target, Dulcaive, was in the presence of a mythical species known as a woman. Many people jest and make memes over Raiden's response to her noticing him, but don't mistake yourself, because this is the average male reaction to a woman. Through the use of our exceptional and well-practiced negotiation skills, I was able to come to a peaceful agreement with the enemies that remained in our path to Dulcaive. Finally, we made it, but first, we had to topple our next roadblock. Being in the presence of a woman filled Raiden with a brief surge of euphoria. That was until it turns out she was the next boss fight and had consumed the hand job fruit. I gotta hand it to the devs. This boss fight is great, but f***ing obnoxious thanks to these controller terrorists. Instead of bombarding you guys with a hand full of useless information, this fight is more than doable thanks to the fact that blade mode is still viable with this mod. Handling the damage you take isn't too bad, as her right-hand men tend to drop a bunch of health packs. Now that I'm done smothering your ear holes with shitty puns, it was time for her second and final phase, where the only thing that you need to watch out for is the fact that Mistral is apparently a fucking earthbender. Luckily, you have a checkpoint here, and her attacks aren't too hard to dodge. With a bit of patience and focus, beating her isn't very hard, unless you are mentally stunted or have a hand fetish. In that case, it is definitely going to be hard. 6 tries later, I toppled the 4th boss with only my fist, and our lead went cold, thanks to Dulcaive greatly increasing the temperature of his organs via a f***ing bomb strapped to his chest. It was time for the gang to head to Mexico to once again track down another lead. A cyborg in Mexico would quickly blow our cover, but thankfully Raiden had an answer. Mexico was home to one of our favorite flavor of video game levels, the sewers. Down here in this dankest dungeon was an experience. Whether it was getting my heartbeat robbed by the homeless roid-fueled bots and their domain expansion, primal unadulterated testosterone, or the electrophilia cancer bots, down here there was a little something for everyone. Through my trials and tribulations from avoiding stealth entirely, I discovered that the backstep ability actually functioned with this mod. This discovery was nothing short of revolutionary for this challenge run, and would help ease the Suplex City levels of beatdowns I was receiving. After dedicating 46 minutes to an area that should have only taken 10, I met George, a child that was abducted by this private military group. Although he escaped, he let me know that there was another group of children still in captivity, and those wicked wrongdoers were planning on cutting out their organs. The language the boy spoke was an enigma as confusing as Elon Musk's upside-down smile. But one thing was for sure, Raiden could somehow understand him, and he wasn't going to let this group of shitters and their villainous actions slide. In due course, we found the secret lab in question, and after getting my metallic taint tickled by everything and anything, I masterfully sent these robots to meet their binary makers, and discovered that these grade A prime cut stinking piles of horseshit were already committing the said atrocities. Following a quick suckle from the particular bosom of intelligence known as espionage, we discovered that the girth gremlin from earlier seemed to be one of the head honchos in this operation. Raiden had seen enough. It was time to hunt him down and make him pay for his sins. Stealth was optional here, but so was the fact that I didn't have to go and rupture this poor soul's colon for a solid minute. It was time for our next boss fight, and thanks to what I learned in my no damage run, this brawl wasn't too difficult to tackle. I'm sure there are far more effective and practical methods to dismantle this manned gear. However, I've been hardwired with a Neanderthal mindset, and there simply wasn't time to reprogram it. So I kept sticking to this slippery fuck and slapped and clapped my meatsicles against it until it finally shut down. It only took me 3 tries, and honestly, if any of you weirdos want to give this run a shot, it would probably take you far less. With this fucker down, we finally found where those poor children were being held captive. A scientist confronted Raiden, but unfortunately he didn't read the fine print of Raiden's employee contract, which states that anyone who resorts to kidnapping children is most definitely a dickhead and deserves to have their organs slap-chopped. The children were saved, but that lunatic was still on the loose. Fortunately, Raiden knew where they were headed. Next stop was the wondrous travel destination of America, Denver, Colorado, where the one thing any normal person would want to do while visiting it is leave. The Denver police seemed to have joined in on this no-holds-barred spit roast and were on the gremlin's payroll. But as luck would have it, Raiden and his fist had no problem effortlessly spreading violence upon everyone and everything without bias or discrimination. And before you ask, yes, the mariachi costume stays on during his violence-spreading sessions. I was able to blast through the Denver streets without dying a single time, but that really wasn't a marvel, seeing as you can pretty much one-shot these soldiers with a sliding kick. In typical Japanese developer fashion, the last boss we faced was now a common enemy. They hit hard, and I was one slap away from being sent to the Shadow Realm, but luckily, you're in the presence of a masterclass gamer. Sometimes. Very rarely. That whole section I just read out, I lied. I died like 3 times. Raiden wasn't pulling any punches. He was here to spank Sundowner and his team into submission, and he had no problem depopulating an office building full of their soldiers to do so. At this point, I was thoroughly steeped in this septic water of a challenge run, so the enemies that were in my path weren't very tough to get through. Even this lowly troglodyte and his testicle tenderizer weren't a problem. This fucker was a menace to me in my no damage run, so it felt great being able to beat them down without a single hiccup. I skedaddled through a metro, regrettably didn't find Artyom, and then was humbled by a few goons on the surface. For those that follow the lore of the SCU diligently, some may recall that in my no damage run I mentioned that I did a no sword run, but wasn't sure if I was going to upload it. In that challenge, not only was I playing the game on easy as someone someone suggested it in the comments of the mod page, but I also used consumables. So in that challenge, any tumors that needed to be excised met the warmth of an RPG or EMP grenade. This time around, that wasn't an option, and sometimes fighting more than a few enemies was a pain. The private military's HQ was in sight, and it was time to pay them a visit. On his way over, Raiden was minding his own damn business when Sam coincidentally showed up and decided to drop a 69TB zip nuke of the truth to Raiden's Neuralink. Raiden discovered that he was killing innocent people. He thought that these officers were willingly attacking him, but in reality, they had no choice. This discovery apparently gave Raiden an aneurysm and essentially turned him into a lobotomite. My man Raiden needed to be riding in a mobility scooter because the walk to the HQ literally lasted about as long as Concord did. At the front gates is where we are introduced to one of my favorite bosses in the series, Monsoon, the apparent offspring of Buggy the Pirate and an Among Us character. I'll be frank, Monsoon fucked hard, and not even a wish from a fairy godparent was going to get me out of this one. This unarmed mod didn't interfere with how this fight played out, seeing as you can still use block and blade mode. Although, not being able to use an EMP grenade made taking him down pretty tough, and we won't talk about the run where I almost beat him, but lost because I didn't play with my controller's clitoris fast enough. With Monsoon tenderized to a pulp, this crusade was far from over. In my last video, I forgot to mention that I discovered that you don't actually have to eliminate all of the enemies in the lobby while waiting for Doctor to call you an elevator. This strat can save some of you aspiring challenge runners or Revengeance difficulty enjoyers an aneurysm or two. And that was your random video game fact with your favorite YouTube psychopath. I scaled the World Marshal corporate building, swinging and tossing my meat around vigorously, and suffered quite a few resets because I was a little too aggressive. Instead of taking things slowly, I exercised my American rights and attempted to completely ignore everything while destroying the security gates along the way, with no regard for potential hazards or anyone's personal safety. This tactic was a wildly effective way to become a Darwin Award recipient. My enemies and the cans of whoop-ass they provided came in different flavors now, but were all equally as lethal. So far, this was arguably one of the toughest parts of the challenge run, and the difficulty of playing on hard was starting to finally shine. Ultimately, after around 20 minutes of having my scrotum stepped on by unmanned gears and soldiers alike, I took a page out of SpongeBob's book and realized that running loop-de-loops around the office building forced them to chase you one by one, allowing you to pick them off. Why was this a successful tactic? Don't ask questions. In the wise words of Todd Howard, it just works. At the top of World Marshal HQ, I experienced the Ghost of Tsushima level. This place reminded me of my father because I was smacked and disciplined more times than I would have liked. Once I was done cosplaying as Jin Sakai, it was time for the boogeyman of all Metal Gear Rising challenge runs, the end of this level. To the untrained eye, this may just look like a normal elevator, but to anyone that knows, this is where boys become men. On higher difficulties, the ending of this level is pretty much a skill check, and on the ride to the 10-penny penthouse, every variety of enemy enters this crucible with the sole goal of trying to sniff your farts. On my no damage run, this area had me clenching my asshole harder than a straight man going to prison, but this time around, I was able to go insano style on these cretins. Surprisingly, I only died twice, and one of those was a load of complete barnacles. Still riding off of the dopamine and serotonin that I had worked up smashing that section, I entered the Metal Gear Royal Rumble, featuring Diet Mistral and Monsoon. This fight left me more confused than a homeless person getting put on house arrest, because I came in here fully expecting to meet God, but I somehow was able to beat both of them on my first try. This accomplishment was nothing short of extraordinary, and I better change my name to FedEx the way I was throwing my package around and f***ing these two good. All jokes aside, the fight with these two is exactly the same, if not seemingly easier thanks to more health and energy. It should only require around 10% activation of your frontal lobe and a basic understanding of the game to actually beat them, especially with the ridiculous amount of health packs that drop during the Mistral fight. With their defeat, Raiden confronted Sundowner, and we quickly discovered that cyborg Jeff Bezos loved children more than the average Minecraft YouTuber did. His scheme was to use these children's organs to create more cyborgs and amass a child military. Following a walk up to the roof of apparently the tallest skyscraper known to mankind, it was time for their 1v1, and Raiden made it his personal goal to cancel Sundowner's Prime membership for good. Everyone and their senile geriatric grandparents knows that Sundowner is one of the easiest fights in the game, which is a shame because it's easily one of the coolest. Provided that you don't miss any of your attacks against his abstinence belt, you can get to popping his cherry almost immediately. But just like in my no damage run, thanks to my stunted cerebral development when I was a child, saying that was easier than doing so. Unbelievably, his second phase is easier than the first, despite the fact that he claims he is fucking invincible, which is pretty much like being in an elevator with one other person, blasting the most disgusting ass you ever have in your entire life, and then blaming it on them. We both knew that just wasn't true, and his mouth was writing checks that he couldn't cash. I ignored his helicopters completely and just swung my fist away until I defeated him, blocking when needed and making sure to be as patient as possible. Funnily enough, I died more times scaling up the building once again than I did in Phase 2. Now that Sundowner's livelihood was synonymous to that of the amount of pieces in a LEGO Death Star set, it was time to head to Pakistan to stop the Senator and his sinister plan. Dr. pulled up in a whip to pick up Raiden, but that didn't last very long, seeing as Raiden had developed a mild case of autism and instead decided he would like to walk back the rest of the way. We now had to backtrack our way through Colorado, but this time with a 5-star wanted level, which in layman's terms meant that I was going to be receiving a pounding that was comparable to that of a star on blacked.com, aka your boy was crossing his fingers and toesies that he would survive every confrontation he got into. This section had a pretty gnarly combo of enemies you have to go up against, and the only advice I have for you here if you're attempting this challenge is the good old, sagely, older than time itself advice, that is, get good. 5 business days and 13 deaths later, Raiden discovered a bike that had his name written on it. And thanks to the plethora of YouTube comments in my last MGR video, it turns out Sam was not only a great pseudo-antagonist, but also a very caring person for leaving this bad boy behind. It wasn't long until our peaceful ride to the local airfield would be disrupted by none other than the primordial Sigma male himself, Jetstream Sam. Just like my experience with Stellar Blade, I came for the ass but stayed for the wacky story and great gameplay, where that gameplay was seemingly disguised as cock and ball torture. The triple cheeked up cyborg wanted to settle the score, a good old fashioned duel, twinks versus manly men, and Raiden obliged. I'll just say it now, this fight is undoubtedly one of the manliest fights in a video game, and if you disagree, then I want you to know that it is totally okay to have your own opinion, and to be wrong. I'm just going to dip my toesies into a little spoiler territory here, but as I mentioned in my no damage run, Sam's fight was probably the hardest fight in this entire challenge. But this time, it was worse, since I was playing on hard difficulty compared to the previous normal. For this go-around, I had no access to any tools at my disposal, like Monsoon's weapon, firearms, or repair kits, which I used on the level before this. So if you're attempting this challenge, your mileage may vary. In the wake of getting absolutely decimated my first handful of tries, I decided to take things slow and only go for a fisting combo when I was sure I wouldn't get hit. On top of that, I refused to take parry openings as often because losing health in exchange for some extra damage just wasn't worth it. Even when you disarm him, Sam had no problem showing you that he not only had more sex than your virgin ass, but also hair on his testicles. There was virtually no room to mess up because doing so would send you on a quick trip to a black screen. Finally, I beat Sam at the cost of about 3 hours and no longer believing there is any sort of god out there. Upon examination of his body, it turns out Sam was an Addy and didn't need any cybernetic enhancements because he had genetic dominance over us troglodytes. Blade Wolf and I gave him the proper burial he deserved and then made off on our way to save the world from its impending doom. We came across the average Shy Lily enjoyer. Raiden asked his daughter, who is apparently the female equivalent of Jimmy Neutron, to give us a ride to Pakistan, and then we were off on our way, packing the long dick of justice to teach the Senator a good lesson. Here on the other side of the world, Raiden made sure that every one of these diaper-soiling degenerates knew his name. Thanks to a super secret route, I was able to avoid any confrontation confrontations in the hangar and made my way to the final bosses of this game. Some call this intuition. I call it wanting to be excluded from a turbo ass f***ing because I knew what was coming ahead. The senator pulled up and flexed his new ride, courtesy of the amazing taxpayers of America. After listening to the peak dialogue, and yes, we are extremely biased about this game on my channel, the senator decided it was time to give Raiden a reason why cheap and affordable healthcare in America doesn't matter. Because you can't get any medical help when your chest cavity has a hole the size of a tractor in it. Post no damage run, I pretty much spent so much time in this boss fight that I knew my way around Metal Gear Excelsis like the back of my testicles. But even with that knowledge, my fists did virtually zero damage, and I was forced into pretty much no damaging this hunk of metal once again. Same shit, just a different toilet. Raiden was now canonically the strongest man in existence, having bested a billion-dollar death robot using only his fists, not once, but twice. The senator, though, didn't like that fact and decided to take matters into his own hands. Alongside being an Elden Lord, Armstrong must have been Irish because his power level was clearly doubling after a quick trembolone sandwich. This is where the real challenge of the finale began, because this man was hitting harder than the ending of Grave of the Fireflies. If you've never seen that movie, don't. Your entire month will be ruined. Equivalent to the Sam fight, the fade you catch with Armstrong is nothing but a skill check on hard difficulty. Knowing when to block or dodge each of his attacks was imperative. Also, this fight is the origin of this specific mod, so the gameplay isn't much different than if you were to play without it. Raiden's poetic way with words almost convinced the senator to change sides. Despite his muscular and very American-looking exterior, it almost seemed like Raiden touched his heart. But after realizing it was all a bunch of fanfic nonsense, the senator had enough and decided Raiden wouldn't be leaving here with a beating heart. Letting Armstrong essentially kill you triggers the final fight and this glorious scene. Let's please have a moment of silence to thank Platinum Games for their service to humanity. The senator essentially now had all 5 pieces of Exodia, which meant that it was time for me to experience 100% organic and testosterone-fed depression. In my first 6 tries, I got absolutely dumpstered. I was worried this was going to turn into the same BDSM experience I went through in my no damage run. Even though I also knew this fight quite well, it was still a test of metal, and one I was failing at miserably. Interestingly enough, because Blade Wolf throws you Sam's sword, it shows in Raiden's block animation. This kind of worried me for the integrity of this challenge, but I doubt that the weapon made me do any more damage though, because I was still dealing a hair on an ant's testicles amount with each hit. By the grace of the 9, I realized that I had obtained a few health pack consumables after fighting the lot near the beginning of the level. These would be game changing, but before I went and blew my load, I spent a solid 10 minutes sitting there with my thumb in my ass, remembering how to backstep Armstrong's attacks, preparing for the final fight where I would actually take him down. Following my practice, I proceeded to straight up hurricane dick smack the f*** out of this buffoon. I'm not going to front with you gentlemen though, the 5 repair kits I used came in clutch, and my fight with Armstrong would have probably taken a lot longer without them. The man that gave Raiden a hemorrhoid the size of a tangerine was defeated, and without a care in the world for the negative ramifications of destroying government property, Raiden tore the senator's heart out just to be sure that the job was done. So yes, you can beat Metal Gear Rising Revengeance without a sword, by using a mod, of course. I hope you beautiful beings enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Me saying MGR has quickly become one of my favorite games of all time isn't satire. I genuinely mean it. Because of this game, I actually have gone through all the Metal Gear games and can't wait for the Snake Eater remake. I will surely do at least a video or 2 on that masterpiece when it releases later this year. Thank you to the Diaper Booty Gang and Chairman for sponsoring my channel and this video, and as always, I have more content coming for you gamers incredibly soon. I hope you have a great night, and I just wanted to let you know that you look great today. Keep doing you. You're killing it. Peace, love, and boners.